So hi, I'm Kat Conour. I'm here on Miwok territory in the Bay Area, Marin County. A little bit about me. I'm a marriage and family therapist trained in ketamine and as a trainee in MAPS and MDMA for PTSD. Like many, I wear many hats and also support in advocacy and philanthropy to help amplify the work of visionary leaders and orgs in this space who are committed to creating just, equitable world, including access to psychedelics and to the healing potentials there, and also to the wide range of benefits, including monetary, that are coming about in this radical time. So it's really a great honor for me at the intersection of so many things that I care about to be helping facilitate this conversation with these amazing beings we have here for this panel entitled Psychedelics, Philanthropy, and Power in the Emerging Psychedelic Industry. With that, let's ground in some context. If we look in a Western American framework of philanthropy within a free market capital system, we often have the place where what can be an extractive economic model to produce profit, doesn't have to be, but that's the dominant paradigm, and what could be described as a band-aid approach or palliative care, or what comes after to address and give back from what has been taken. Of course, we've seen in more recent times a real movement towards the triple bottom line, people, profit, and planet, and many alternative economic models that we are now seeing bridge into the intersection of psychedelic medicine and healthcare and innovation, technology, AI, data, right? It's kind of all coming together in this confluence now. And I think we can all, those of us who've been in here, feel, recognize the exponential change that is happening as a large fuel injection of money and talent and ambition and good intention and is coming together right now. And so we have this group of incredible beings here with us today who are also carrying various communities and visions and values that are really behind the scenes and coming forward in helping to shape what this change looks like. And some have been in this field working with psychedelics and advocacy for decades. Some are newer. But through that combination, I think we'll really get to see, get a unique vantage point on what they're noticing and really what's possible here and now and what's at stake here and now. And the last bit of context I'll give around that is just, you've probably noticed if you've been attending other panels and speaking sessions at this conference, there's a real focus on reciprocity as an Indigenous principle that I want to hold in the context here, that we uniquely have these panelists here who are a unique subset of folks who are engaging with that principle. And so I'm just going to say there's a biased lens here, both from me and I think the group here, around how we want to see philanthropy and shifting power dynamics in the context of psychedelics play out, although I'm sure there's differences even here among us, but that this is a subset in a much larger picture that includes all the way to pharma on the other end and more traditional philanthropy, but really want to invite that lens and nuanced framework and discussion here as we look at, okay, philanthropy, reciprocity, where do these overlap and where are they different? So from here, I want to shift and introduce you to our panelists, starting with David Bronner. David, as many of you know, has been in this space for a long time. He's Chief Cosmic Engagement Officer at Dr. Bronner's, a leading soap maker in the country, and who's been just a leader in better business. We'll just leave it at that. Much to be said there. And longtime advocate in really being a stand for the work of psychedelics when government was not in the picture and when many others were not at all. So thank you, David, for your work, and I'm sure you'll share more with us around how that is shifting now at this time. We have Sutton King, who's an Afro-Indigenous woman and health advocate, who's founder of, actually, I'm going to let you speak to that, Sutton, but who has joined on with Journey Collab, coming from her background advocating for her Indigenous communities on the East Coast, and bringing that at the intersection of Journey Collab, which is bringing mescaline into FDA, and looking at giving back to the communities from which that medicine comes. Looking forward to hearing from you on that, Sutton. And we have Troy, who I'm not even going to attempt to say the name correctly. I'll also let you introduce, but who, as I understand it, was adopted by the Comanche a long time ago and has been a long-time advocate of the Comanche tribes and also of the Eagles. And through his work with Saya has created opportunities for a reciprocal and honoring relationship between the Eagles. And that extends into so much more. And I'll let him speak to that as well. Thank you for being here, Troy. And David Heldreth, who is working closely, I think, with a number of the people here. There's a lot of overlap in this synergy of relationships. And David, who has a background in science and journalism, and was a part of a historic FDA, spoke at a historic FDA trials, not the word, but I think you know what I mean, around cannabis, CBD, and others to help advocate for their use, and is the CEO of Panacea Plant Sciences and another organization that are bringing patents forward into this space and to create real synergy between plants and people and profit and giving back, which I'm sure we'll hear from him about as well. Okay, well, I know I didn't do any of you justice, but now I am going to turn it over and start with just a question to help us hear in your own words a little bit, in about 3 minutes or less, a bit about who you are, the organizations, the people that you represent, and specifically as relates to the conversation we're here to have today, around the business model or organizational model and approach that your organization is taking in order to engage in psychedelic philanthropy. And let's start with Sutton, please.
Wawayne Yako, Kate. Poso Shokoli, Sutton King Nukat, Ungwahuwe Nii, Magneta Nawikitalota, Oniota Aga Nii. Hello, my name is Sutton King. My English name is Sutton King, and my Indian name is Naktal Pianuki, also known as Comes First Woman. And so I'm, as Kat shared, the Chief Impact Officer for Journey Collab. I'm also the president of the Urban Indigenous Collective, which is a grassroots organization here in Lenape-Hoking, also known as New York City. And we really advocate for the rights of urban natives and really make sure that we're defending those rights here in urban areas, making sure that our communities know that our rights as Indigenous peoples extend beyond the borders of reservations. As Kat shared, I'm Afro-Indigenous. I'm of the Menominee United Nations of Wisconsin. I would identify as an Indigenous health advocate, a researcher, as well as a social entrepreneur. And I've really dedicated my career to scaling innovative solutions to improve Indigenous health equity and really centering culturally appropriate methodologies within business, healthcare, and technology. And as far as Journey Collab, we are a for-profit company, and we are taking mescaline through the FDA, and we do recognize our responsibility to Indigenous communities, the communities which I come from, which Troy comes from. And it's important that we are ensuring that the Indigenous communities which have discovered, innovated, and stewarded these medicines for time immemorial are a part of the wealth creation that's happening. And not just the wealth creation that's happening, that are part of the consultation and the co-creation that's happening with our businesses. And so we're doing that through our stakeholder model, in which we're building a stronger, successful business that can return wealth to all shareholders, including Indigenous people, peoples through the creation of our journey, our reciprocity trust that holds 10% equity. And so just really glad to be here in community with you all and be able to talk about the ways in which we are really instilling Indigenous ways of being and knowing within our businesses, and the way that we're thinking about ensuring that the 7 generations moving forward have what they need to survive and, quite frankly, thrive. So thank you. Wowainen, Yako.
Thank you, Sutton. Let's pass it over to David Bronner.
Thank you. And, thank you, Sutton. Yeah, just adding briefly, basically Dr. Broners is engaged in philanthropic areas across the psychedelic space, from supporting MAPS, primary project of moving MDMA through FDA approval process for treatment-resistant PTSD. This is, obviously crucial for the suffering population first and foremost, but also it's a tactic to generate the clinical evidence that will destigmatize the culture and just move to enable other avenues of integration of medicine aside from the medical pharma route. And to that end, we're primary sponsors of the Oregon's Measure 109 that integrates psilocybin therapy outside of the medical pharma frame, so all adults who can safely benefit can access this therapy. We're all struggling with the dilemmas of life and don't need a treatment-resistant depression diagnosis to benefit. We also are supportive of the various decriminalization efforts. We really feel that the way the Indigenous hold these medicines in prayerful reverence and are accessible in community and community-based healing is crucial, and supporting models and policies that enable that, as crucial as it is to help people in suffering acute psychological distress through the medical pharma frame, and of course that'll be insurable and and reimbursable. But nonetheless, I think a larger vision of healing involves being held in a community and in a lifelong relationship. So models like the Native American Church and Santo Daime, these models need to flourish and spread. So we're actively supporting these. But as Sutton was saying, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the Indigenous traditions that have been holding these medicines in ways and setting the whole groundwork for the modern psychedelic renaissance. And as we begin to monetize these medicines and these big pharma companies, including MAPS, engage, that it's really important that we reciprocate. So to that end, we're big supporters of the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative, which is working hard with the Native American Church, the National Council of the Native American Churches, to preserve peyote through a multi-pronged strategy involving cultivation, greenhouses, well, not greenhouses, nurseries, culturally appropriate depending on the chapter, working in the gardens in Southwest Texas. We supported SIA and really excited by Troy's leadership to get a permit to grow and set the model as the mother church to really show how the medicine can be produced in a culturally appropriate, Indigenous-led way that we can be allies and support. And then Chacruna's really amazing Reciprocity initiative. We're really excited by that and are supporting that. And then there's a new project, and maybe I'll just stop talking, but I'll talk later in another about the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund, and I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks, David. As you can tell, there's so much here to go into in so many different ways, shapes, and forms that's needed and that folks are showing up to support. Troy, David, I'm going to actually let you two, because I know you're working quite well together. Whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead, David.
Oh, well, thank you. So I'm coming from Bellevue, Washington, on Duwamish land. So my name is David Heldreth. I'm the founder and CEO of Panacea Plant Sciences. I would describe myself as an activist, educator, inventor, and journalist. I found myself working at the intersection of the fields between the cultivation of plants, fungi, and other life forms, and how these life forms interact with the human body, each other, and the environment. Earlier in my life, I was studying aerospace engineering and marine biology, but the personal experience with sacred plants and mushrooms helped heal physical injuries as well as childhood traumas. And that changed the trajectory of my life forever. And it led to both my creation of this company as well as the work that I'm doing with Indigenous cultures and others. In honor and respect to those groups, we would like to announce that we are designating a 32% of our equity pool as preferred shares. And these shares will have voting rights and will only be able to be owned by Indigenous partners or 401c3 organizations which work with them. We hope this work will be done in concert with people of color as well as LGBTQ+ and other communities. These preferred shares will have a 10x dividend rate compared to the common shares. The goal of this is that they will be able to retain and hold voting rights while having the money serve as a pool which can fund the work that they need to do in their communities. Additionally, our corporate bylaws are going to be set that 32% will remain in perpetuity. Any investment that we take will then be offset by the same amount of preferred shares to retain the 32% level. 16% of this is going to be going to SIA, the Mother Church of the Comanche Native American Church 1918 Charter Association. The other 16% will be going to the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund. Giving the equality, equity, and control to SIA and others as a form of reparations is a way of honoring the original stakeholders in these, and the needs of these should be put forth at the beginning of any action. Further, as work on new scientific projects leads to new Indigenous groups, Miriam and Troy, Miriam being with the Indigenous Fund, have pledged to continue to support our efforts and our company to follow the Nagoya Protocol with the fund and bring these other groups, both Indigenous and other, into this fold. Additionally, Panacea is asking all companies we collaborate with to agree to follow the Nagoya Protocol. We've had 2 groups so far agree to this and sign contracts already, and I cannot disclose those so far, but I hope to in the future. And
Thank you so much, David. I can see stuff happening in the chat. I'm just looking at the faces around this panel, noticing myself tearing up and goosebumps, and just feeling deep, deep gratitude and celebration to be here with the examples that each of you are holding. And thank you for choosing this moment and this group to bring this forward. And for the support that all of you are doing here. And I also want to name, before we shift to Troy, still staying in this kind of intro phase, just that a lot has been, like, there's so much that you just communicated in that, some of which may feel very familiar to folks listening in, and some that might feel like another language for others. And so I hope that while we don't get too bogged down in the details in this, that we want to create some accessibility, because really the ways that the values that we hold dear, the vision that we have, they say the devil is in the details. That some of what you just mentioned are things that folks in this room and other rooms have been grappling with. The structures, the legal entities, the way that power is constructed, the way that finances are flowed through, make all the difference, right, between intention and reality. So I really want to acknowledge that here, and hope that we can have some time to unpack that a bit more as we go. Thank you for that, David. Troy, let's turn it over to you.
Marowe, Koina Makwitsuana Kwitanai. You can call me Troy. First, I want to be thankful to a lot of the people that have been supportive of the people here. And being a grantee of Dr. Bronner's and River Styx has been more than a joy. They're so mission driven and so aware, and they listen to our communications to them. And that's kind of a new dynamic that's going on. I also want to be thankful to the alliances with the new community to create a sustainable synergistic change through sharing equity through the Nagoya protocols. It's been a lot of work. It's been reframing a lot of issues. It's been very appreciative on all people that have been working with it. And so it's hasn't been as hard as we expected, but more transformative. And so that's been very interesting. And I want to be thankful to the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund. It's actually a perfect fit for us. And it's exactly what the people ask for, not only in process, but in result. It has been, I think that fund will be the gift that keeps on giving, far beyond where we can see right now. And the people that did the work on that, they knew who they are. We send out a lot of love to them and a lot of appreciation. And we know what the time spent has been to create this. So, I also want to thank Mike J. in such a sensitive way that he's shared the Comanche way in his publication, Mescaline, A Global History of the First Psychedelic. It's been taken in really well by the people. And we know he had a lot more information, but he chose not to share it. And it made the elders feel good. And not that there won't be a time for that, but this was a beginning. And so we appreciate the journey with him. We have other friends that are CCI, Cactus Conservation Institute, which is an academic group supporting us in our peyote work. Journey Collab, pharmaceutical group, which is really caring about all people and trying to make sure that the Indigenous lens is looked through. And we've had many, many conversations from the very beginning. I so appreciate them. They've been here for ceremonials here, and we give a lot of love to them. I'm very emotional about it, so it's very appreciative. Then we have Panacea Plant Sciences. I know the word biotech is a little out there for this community, but my friend David, his heart is so big and he wants to give back so much. He is young at this with this community, but he is diving right in. He will be here in a couple of weeks to spend time here. And we sure appreciate this way to model new behaviors to groups in that space. I will thank him when he gets here. So just want him to know. To the people out there, I just want them to know that Definity cannot be owned. We have to sit in a quiet place with that and be aware of what this world that we live in now that's running everything has been doing that. We cannot do this anymore. This is not the way. So let's find a new way to do this. We have to open up our minds and open up our hearts and actually hear the people. It's a lot of hard work. It makes us deal with our frailties and our injuries. And it makes them also, the people, what the outside world doesn't understand, that when you bring this up, it brings them back into their traumas. That sensitivity that we're all talking about here is about 100 times more in community. So even a whisper of what we're talking about here is waves and waves of giant waves going through community. Yeah, it's hard to imagine what I deal with here on a daily basis on these points. SIA being the mother church of the Comanche Native American Church. We're dedicated to uphold the spiritual integrity and all the historic Numina forms of worship. We're the official repository and archive for the history, culture, and spirit of the Numina Comanche people. It's a little heavy. And we're reaching out, making friends with these, and creating a container of support. In this situation, we are speaking out to the world. I'm sure we're going to catch a lot of flack. That's kind of part of it. But just understand we're dedicated to this. I will put the rest of my life and every breath into what we are doing here. And I know the people that are here with me are dedicated in the same way. The elders have backed me doing this and chose that I was the one to step out into this world since I was born that way in that white world. It was brought in by the oldest elder of the Comanche tribe when I was a teenager. She lived to be 109 years old. She lived as a free Comanche. And so for the last 40 years, me and my other half that do this together, that founded SIA, have been trained in the old ways. We gather the songs, we gather the stories, the sacred sites, everything that goes along, the feathers. It's an amazing aspect and a large weight that they put on us. So we just want to help in the outside world through education, through scientific papers. We work to impact wind energy, pesticides, illegal trafficking in feathers, release wild eagles into the wild all over the world, to bring back ecosystems and heal them. Our way is we pray through all the eagles in the world. So we're supposed to humble ourselves below peyote, pray up through it. The eagles take it to the Almighty. So we're trying to heal all the different pieces to make sure that our culture is whole, and then model that behavior with our alliances with these outside groups that are dedicated to uphold our spiritual integrity. And we want to give thanks to them. And I want to thank Chacruna giving voice to the people. And we want them to know that we hear them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Troy, for bringing that energy and spirit, as well as sharing some of what you're up to in the world and the gratitude and the partnerships. And in building on that, hearing you use the word alliances, partnerships, trauma, lifelong commitment, right? Wanting to open up more of a conversation here, knowing that there are new and old emerging alliances here and evolving new shapes at the intersection of for-profit, nonprofit, technology, ancient technology, biocultural preservation. What are the challenges and opportunities that you all are facing in this context, in collaborating and working together amongst each other, and also in this larger ecosystem of relationship? What are the challenges and opportunities you face?
Jump in and just share, we're really leveraging the free, prior, and informed consent protocol within the United Nations. And we really see that as a gold standard in the space, as well as the Nagoya protocol. But I think that when we're able to utilize a protocol that has been developed with insight from Indigenous leaders and Indigenous communities, we're really able to have these pathways to engaging meaningful conversations where we can co-create and really build a company that is ethical, that is able to share the wealth, right? That is really able to make sure that people are having true seats at the table, right? And actually being heard. And so that is really where we're coming into the conversation, wanting to make sure that this tool is going to be a resource that is utilized throughout the space and is seen as a way to really make sure that Indigenous peoples aren't alienated from the space where historically we have been. And so it's really exciting to see, Journey Collab leveraging this tool, but also other companies are starting to join us in this. And I think that is the opportunity there, right? When we leverage these tools, we're actually able to de-risk our businesses and build more successful businesses that can actually return that value to all shareholders, including Indigenous peoples, including our investors, including the employees. And so again, these tools that may seem so innovative to maybe the Western world, whereas in my communities, the Indigenous spaces, reciprocity, kinship, that is woven throughout our community's DNA and is the true way which we can keep balance within our communities.
And I'll just, hang on. I think that, the opportunity is definitely the companies like Journey Collab and others here that are, really appreciating that these Indigenous ways of healing and being and knowing are at the root of this renaissance. But I think the challenge is there's, let's say, a fair amount of people in the ecosystem is kind of have that colonialist mindset, like until like the Western world, does it the Western way. It's not, it's got to go through the FDA approval process, and everyone's like taking credit, like, oh, we're doing that, and and not recognizing like, okay, this is just like a formality that we got to deal with in our kind of messed up, which whatever our cultural approach to medicine, but that indeed, like really we're integrating these Indigenous ways of healing into the culture and doing it through this mechanism, but not to like, how do you say, it's just like a tactic that we need to do, but ultimately this is coming from these Indigenous traditions, and to make sure we are reciprocating. So I think that the challenge and the opportunity, like we just need to like educate the for-profit ecosystem here, what is owed, and make sure reciprocation is happening.
And I'd love to just jump back in and share that I think the challenges with this, right, really do come with people walking with us in this third way, right, on the investor side, really, putting your money where your mouth is, right? And I think it's really important that we have folks that come in and invest and signal to the space that this is the gold standard. This is the way in which you should be, integrating and building community as the same time as you're building business, right? And so I would say that has been a challenge. And I think also it's been a challenge through looking at the FPIC system and what we're going to be embarking on there. I think it's important to share that we're not a monolith as Indigenous peoples, right? And there are varying perspectives, and so it's going to be very important that we're honoring those perspectives as we build our drug program. And so there are definitely challenges, but I think there are much more greater opportunities to build this co-collaboratively.
Thanks, Sutton. I want to insert in there too, because this word just keeps coming up as both of you were just speaking around ownership and the role that ownership has and the impact that ownership has as a tool being utilized going through the FDA process, patenting process, things like that, and how to utilize that while not becoming it, right? This fine line there. And I wonder if David or Troy have anything to add.
Do you mind if I'd love to speak on that actually? It's a very touchy subject, and for a lot of reasons. The idea of owning things is complicated, and on that front, this is something that me and Troy have actually kind of followed along with what we've been working on. So I guess technology and medical development, as we're speaking in the modern era, kind of revolves around patents, and it kind of allows for, I guess it's for better or worse, it allows, and mostly worse, revolves around the ability of giving companies some space to work with a group, because without that, someone else can just come in and copy what you're doing, and that's not always a bad thing because competition is helpful. But in order for something to grow, you need to give it space. And so while these things are starting, it allows them to have that space. And the key there is just allowing that to be given control to people such as Indigenous groups. That way, whether this is a plant, an animal, or your child, it grows up correctly, I suppose. And so in that vein, the main reason that I started writing patents wasn't due to an effort to control anything. It was that whenever you're seeing that other companies and other entities are beginning to file patents in these spaces, and you've seen what's happened in the cannabis industry with the myths and illusions and promises similar to promises made by our government to Indigenous cultures with treaties that were never kept. And now the current operation in cannabis has been doing the same thing. There's been no reciprocity for Indigenous cultures, for people of color. And I come from that field as well initially, and it sickens me. And so because of that, while wanting to work within the Goya protocol, I also was deeply afraid of not writing things that I saw, which could be protected and given back. Because if you don't, under our unfortunate system, they are then owned by somebody. And so the ability of ownership of patents is only in our Western outlook. And so I feel it's the ability to utilize that system to give the power back to the Indigenous cultures. And so Panacea Plant Sciences is committing to give control of the patents back to the Indigenous species and groups who are working alongside. We are actually going to begin transferring patents that we filed already to groups such as SIA and others over time. It's a complicated, long process because many of these patents encompass substances that are in several species. And so there's many organizations and ethnic and Indigenous tribes who will be involved. So it's going to take a long time. And secondly, that moving forward, we've already asked Troy, and we would love the help with the groups involved with Chacruna, BIA, and others, and Miriam and the Indigenous Fund, to help us identify groups who would like help creating patents to protect their endangered and Indigenous species, and give this ownership to the Indigenous cultures. But something that I would like to see is that beyond that, there's a movement to give legal rights to species. And by giving them legal rights and then creating these patents and assigning to the Indigenous groups and to the Indigenous species, which I don't know how that will hold up in court, I believe can create a new system. So I would just like to share that.
Thank you, David. Anyone wanting to build on that, David?
I
was thinking David Bronner, but I know we got two Davids going on.
No, I got, I just observing in the chat the comment, that, these shouldn't be patenting in the first place. And, definitely, thinking about what Compass has been trying to do with, patenting psilocybin and in a way that would block anyone else from bringing to market. And obviously this is in the public domain, but, I think the distinction here is kind of what David's saying. And it's interesting to think about because for the most part, I've been able to school, like, let's just beat back these patents whenever they're attempted. But another strategy that David's sharing here that's interesting is to go ahead and do it so that no one who doesn't have the right ethic can do it, and then give it to the Indigenous to be the stewards and custodians. So it's an interesting strategy. And I think alongside we're supporting the Freedom to Operate, which is the NGO that Carrie Turnbull's set up to beat back Compass's overbroad to patents. But really appreciate the another side of the strategy, which is go ahead and patent, but then give it to the rightful kind of stewards and owners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's speaking to this challenge right to operate, stay outside the system, and preserve, aiming to preserve a certain kind of purity or sanctity or sacredness by actually setting a boundary around that engagement. And yet, as we know, encroachment is a big part of the equation, unfortunately, as we've seen unfold over hundreds of years. And then on the flip side, to engage within the system, then, you know, what are the opportunities and challenges that arise there in engaging in that way? So I wonder if folks can speak a little bit more to the approaches that you're taking with respect to your initiatives, your organizations, and what's at stake when you do engage with, right, an anti-patent strategy, or working with equity and shareholders, right?
I'd love to jump in just really quickly on this. One thing that I've noticed is that people end up acting from a place of scarcity whenever in this industry, because it's in a weird state in terms of legality. And so due to that, I feel like it makes it difficult for people to get the capital they need to operate. And so the more times you're giving more back in equity or promising things to the groups who deserve them, investors view that as less money for themselves. And so because they're not necessarily coming from the same places that we are. And so due to that, it creates, it makes it difficult to operate in that way. And so I can see why groups who, instead of offering a direct ownership role, may take other methods in order to raise capital, which is needed for operations, because this is a complicated thing.
You know, I'll jump in and I'll say that, you know, here at Journey Collab, we really do believe that not every approach to IP is equal. I'll say that we do, you know, when we do develop truly novel therapeutics, I think it is beneficial for Penn, so that we can ensure that this business that we're building is able to return capital to our investors, but also to share that wealth with our Indigenous communities, right, through the Reciprocity Trust. And I think that we do believe that it is absolutely inappropriate to attempt to patent molecules that are in the public domain. And we also believe that patent existing, you know, common therapeutic procedures is also very not is inappropriate, to say the least. But we really want to make sure that we're able to create an ethical business that is also successful, that is able to make sure that that trust is, you know, able to return reparations back to Indigenous communities. And, you know, that trust is really to ensure that, one, there is money flowing to conservation through the wealth created through our synthetic mescaline, but also to make sure that access is happening, right? To make sure that we're not being alienated to the therapeutics in which our cultures and our traditions have informed. So I think that it's important to really talk about the ways in which we're incorporating reciprocity, the ways in which we're incorporating equity and inclusion. I think that, you know, during this time, the climate that we're in, so many organizations are talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, right? It's come, you know, as an Afro-Indigenous woman, both Black and Native, it's come a little numbing to me. I've become a little desensitized to it, because what it seems to me is that it's philanthropy after the fact, right? We'll go ahead and put the Black Lives Matter, the labels on our websites. We'll, you know, we'll say, you know, we'll hire that one BIPOC person on our leadership team. But what are we really doing to really address the systemic racism and inequalities that we see in the space, right? And it cannot be philanthropy after the fact. What we have to do is make sure that our stakeholders are included from the genesis of that business, right? And so by putting aside 10% of our equity, we're signaling to our investors, to community, that our stakeholders matter, Indigenous peoples matter, right? And so I just think that this panel is really exciting to be in community with, because you know, we all are walking in this third way together.
Yeah, I just want to appreciate that the business models that are being set up here, I mean, yeah, in a certain sense, or in a very real sense, they're not set up to be profit maximizing, you know, making fiduciary return to shareholders their number one objective, but that is the default of a corporation. Okay. But and then there's, the question, like, how do you attract capital? How do you capitalize ventures that are set up with, multi-stakeholder models, taking into account Indigenous and access and, foregoing, maximizing profit to make sure you're also, addressing the needs of these other stakeholder groups. And, and I think that what's being shown is that there is a real pool of capital out there that that is interested in supporting these social ventures, these hybrid kind of nonprofit, for-profit ventures. And, Dr. Bronner's, we're an example, we're obviously closely held, so that's an advantage, but maybe we'd say MAPS, the benefit corp is, we're capitalizing that with philanthropy, maybe looking at impact loans. And yeah, there's just like a real, growing amount of catalytic capital, impact first investors that really want to support companies that do, take in the social and ecological considerations in their business models and really build that in so that everybody's winning with these models and we're not, exploiting groups or to maximize return just for its own sake.
Thanks for that, David. I can't help but think about the notion of time, right? This kind of the orientation of scarcity versus abundance and how that relates to time, and how what you all are describing, what you're experiencing, and how you do center the triple bottom line, do well by doing good, generate profits that can be fed back, hopefully by setting, not philanthropy after the fact, but engaging stakeholders and building structures from the onset, and what it takes to actually slow down the process from the start to actually engage in these complex relationships, to build trust, to really think through the right, as best you can, structures, while there are others out there, right? This gets into game theory, others out there that are doing business as usual and moving at a very rapid pace. And I think we are all feeling the impacts of that in this space right now. So how are you all relating and orienting to that while holding these values and vision?
For me personally, and with our company, it's been focusing on what we do and finding partnerships. We can't find all of the correct Indigenous groups to work with. I am lucky in that groups like Chacruna, groups like River Styx, groups like MAPS, and groups like SIA have already been doing this foundational work and have built these things. We have groups like Dr. Bronner's and MAPS who have modeled this work and these types of operations. People in the comments have mentioned Ursona, and I very much respect theirs and Paul Stamets strategies, which Paul Stamets seems to be more towards mine, but collaborating with other people. And I believe that the technologies that companies like mine develop will end up being then taken by groups like Journey Collab and utilized to be that, or others to be then taken on to pharmaceutical. We are not going to be a group that can go that direction. So I think the key is that by doing that, you end up removing the structure where you have one giant monolith corporation and you have many, many, many small groups that focus on what they do. And by doing that, things happen quickly because they're all doing it at the same time.
I'd like to jump in there. The speed is amazing of what's going on here in psychedelics. It's way too fast, way too much money. It's a huge rush, and it's completely different from the rhythms of Indigenous life. Completely different. So one of the things that we do is we bring our alliances, we bring them here. They spend time going through ceremony, going to dances, talking to our elders, just slowing them down, letting them understand that these are people. These things and the ways that they live are important, and they have the secrets for all of us. That rhythm that they have, if we could adopt that rhythm, we could save the world. So we can't expect them through talking on Zoom or being here on Chacruna to change who they are. But if they come here and spend time with us here and go through ceremony and maybe even experience some of the medicine with the people and their rhythms, that piece just changes a little bit of the perspective and the awareness, opens it up and slows down the noise, because there's a lot of noise and 85% of it is not good. So let's listen to what's in your heart, what's in your gut, what's in the rhythm of the steps of the people. And when you go and put yourself in that place, and it all at once, it takes you with it, and you get to experience something different. First person. It's not a second, third, fifth person. It's not based on money. It's not based on the model from your parents, on the business model, on any of those things. It's you are just like me, and we can do this together.
Thank you, Troy.
Hmm.
David B., that's what I'm calling you today. I can't help but think of, as we're talking about time and this way and being connected with Troy and the communities he's a part of in your work, how are you grappling with witnessing and experiencing the exponential growth curve that's happening right now?
Yeah, well, we're engaged in a lot of aspects of what's happening. And yeah, I think to kind of what Troy's saying, definitely putting some checks, needing to throw some checks with the freedom to operate, that anti-patenting, or just to, fight back these overbroad IP attempts that are proliferating, is one thing. But yeah, I guess more fundamentally, maybe this would be a good time. I'll dive a little deeper here into the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund. I think, really, communicating effectively with this ecosystem and this whole Chacruna platform that we're participating in right now is an amazing example of communicating to this larger ecosystem that is, right now, capital, a lot of people coming in, and yeah, don't have a whole lot of context and insight maybe. So yeah, so I think being able to effectively communicate about, especially Indigenous stakeholders, to this ecosystem and what's owed, and then setting up efforts like Chacruna's Indigenous Reciprocity initiative, which has done like so much good work to be able, so companies that maybe are a little new and unfamiliar, they realize, oh wait, we do have an obligation and responsibility here. It's an easy way to show support and solidarity. But I did ask Miriam, who's really leading the charge here with the Indigenous Medicine Conservation effort, to share some words. And let me just, actually, because she will say it way better than I could, so I will relay. All right. So over these last 5 years of doing direct support for biocultural conservation in various Indigenous medicine communities, we began to be asked to bring in substantive capital support to directly ensure all the infrastructure, land, ceremonial homes, growing and relationship building with on-the-ground stakeholders, so that these communities could be well set up and be able to continue to deepen and engage in their own autonomous conservation activities going forward. So we listened and are forming this fund to ensure this support in Keystone medicine communities. The fund is governed by Indigenous and allies together and is based on assessment and will help bring biocultural and ecological conservation into the DNA of the psychedelic movement. The Keystone medicine communities we focus on are Iboga, Peyote, Aya, Yahe, Mazatec, mushrooms, and toad. Each medicine has a different approach based on the direction of Indigenous knowledge holders in those communities. Create a medicine consumer guide that will help to safeguard an ethical, sustainable, culturally respectful supply of medicine for future generations, to support the new consumers of medicine, to make choices and understand how to be responsible and give back. Like a sustainable seafood guide, we'll be doing this with many partners in the space and will be easily shareable. How we do this will make the fundamental difference between an ethical and successful psychedelic movement. It is our opportunity to be respectful, good communitarians, and act in a mature and sacred way. So yeah, so just the vision here is just to make, as the psychedelic renaissance unfolds, how do we do this in the right way and show the appreciation and respect and gratitude to the indigenous communities, and be in alliance and support, in a supportive role, really, as they can make sure their medicine and their ways are honored and taken care of for the generations to come.
Yeah.
To just jump in and share something that has always been taught to me from my elders, which is, we put the seeds in the ground when the ground is ready, not because of a calendar date, right? And so I think that we really need to understand when we're bringing Indigenous peoples in, that we're on Indigenous people's timelines, right? And that's going to take as long as it needs, right? And for a good reason, because Indigenous peoples are the only way we can really build any type of business that will be truly successful. Indigenous peoples are the true experts, right? And that's why through the FPIC process, we can co-create to really build something that is meaningful, that is ethical, and that is including the communities, again, that have been oftentimes alienated. So we'll weigh in.
And I think it additionally goes, as Sutton is speaking to, that goes beyond simply even just asking them and working with them in all of this work, is that some of the things that we're working on additionally is that as we partner with universities for research, we are asking them to begin offering donations and scholarships, which will go to programs to educate people of color, LGBTQ+, as well as Indigenous communities in the psychedelic sciences and cultivation and other methods that are being developed. So that way they can form the basis of the science that will exist in the next wave. Secondly, that we're trying to then locate as many facilities, when appropriately, of course, on Indigenous lands. So that way they can continue to get the jobs and money that come from these types of work, because it goes beyond just giving equity and a voice, but to every action you do can impact these communities, whether it's your daily life and how you spend your money or the way that you operate your business. You don't have to give the amount of equity that we are in order to impact these communities.
Thanks. Looks like we lost Troy. I imagine he'll be back soon. We'll welcome him back in. And we have just a handful more minutes before we'll move into taking Q&A from our participants. And as you're kind of shifting a bit into that, David, I want to bring in that question to the rest of you, which is, not everybody out there listening in, participating with us is in a similar position that you all are in relative to this. So, what, if any, meaningful role can people attending the panel today play in helping to influence the flow of capital, of energy in ways that matter to them?
Well, kind of going on the ethical consumer guide, like, all of us as consumers, I like to say that, in the same way, like our dietary choice, like our plate is a farm and our fork is a pitchfork and our knife is a butchering knife. And, our choices, dietary choice, are we supporting farmers that are doing right by the land and by the animals that they raise and the people that they employ? And, or is it a, inhumane disaster? Or, just feeding the machine that's, shredding the planet and communities. And our choice, that as consumers, our choice of medicine is hugely important. And understanding, where did this medicine come from? Is it, coming from a project to the benefit of the Indigenous community, or is it, we don't know? And if we don't know, then more likely than not, it's probably not a good situation. It's, the Amazon's being stripped of ayahuasca vines in many areas. Peyote's in a state of collapse. Iboga, similar. There are alternate, especially with peyote, there's other mescaline-containing cacti like San Pedro that non-natives can avail themselves of. And just, understanding like medicines that are appropriate and which are kind of on a line and which are just not for us. And yeah, and so this consumer guide, like the Marine Stewardship Council, like they'll certify fisheries as sustainable or not, and it's a similar vision. And how do you say, harvesting projects in the Amazon, or even cultivation projects on the Big Island. All these things can work together, and we want to just create more and more awareness that people think about where their medicine comes from in the same way they think about their food or their clothes or their soap. Yeah.
Thanks, David.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I'd say that I've talked about the free, prior, and informed consent protocol. Journey Collab is launching their FPIC process Monday. So please come to our website, sign up for our newsletter, where you'll be able to go ahead and review what that looks like. And what has really gone into that is months and months and months of dedication on really being able to tailor the FPIC process specifically for our mescaline drug development program. And with that FPIC process, we hope to really, again, create meaningful pathways to have conversations about what is culturally appropriate, what is not, when it is the best way to, create these safe containers with this compound in particular. And we want to respect, traditions. We really seek to avoid appropriation. As an Indigenous person, I honor and understand how important that is. And so with that process, we'll be really engaging with different stakeholders throughout Turtle Island who feel comfortable and safe to participate in that process, and we will respect those thoughts, those considerations, and of course that culture. And so I would just really urge folks to sign up so that they're able to have this resource in their tool buckets, and be able to really understand what it takes to go ahead and have that co-creation element within their community and business.
Thanks, Sutton. We're going to shift shortly, but David H., is there anything briefly you want to add in here before we take Q&A? You're on mute, I believe.
I just did it to myself. So I just think it's important that we acknowledge that a lot of these things are just cycles that have happened in history previously. And that although this is a new case, that there's a lot that we can look back in time and see what has happened previously. And cannabis is, again, another much more recent example. And I just hope that we can follow the example of these things like the ethical guides that are being created, because I think it is important for people who aren't Indigenous to have access to these items as well, and to do it in a culturally responsible way eventually. And obviously to start with synthetic or plant medicines or mushroom medicines, which are not as culturally or environmentally sensitive, and because I believe that they have the ability to change the world and to heal communities and people. And so it's also important for us to find ways to give access when possible.
Thanks for that. And thanks everyone, and still channeling in Troy and hoping he'll jump back in. I know there's some questions that folks are hoping to get answered specifically from him as well. And let's now thank you all so much for engaging in this conversation in this way, and let's open it up to hear from some of our participants. And I'm going to start us off with maybe a bit of an edgy question, and near and dear to my heart as well. And as I listen in, I can feel my own sense of inspiration and my body responding to that, and also having been around long enough and in reflecting, say, even in my own participation in the co-founding North Star and the pledge, and really grappling with the huge gap between vision and reality and where the rubber meets the road. And so bringing in, I don't know how to say your name, Shara, who I think has a bit of a perspective here too, we can feel. Do you really think that the models you propose and reciprocity can exist in the capitalist system we all live in?
I think, well, yeah, yes, I think that we need to redefine capitalism, from exploitative, extractive to constructive and multi-stakeholder. And yeah, there's a real pivot. I mean, capitalism as generally practiced is not working. It's, does not take account a lot of social and environmental impacts, externalizes those costs in the interest of maximizing profit. And yeah, this is a a disaster on the planet. But internalizing those social and environmental impacts, setting up ethical businesses that take account of all stakeholders and make sure everyone is winning and benefiting, and society as a whole and the natural world is benefiting. This is the future. This is what we really need to see happen in the space. And Dr. Bronner's is an example, not to toot our own horn, but we're set up in a way that we cap our executive compensation at 5 times our lowest paid position, and all profit we don't need for the company's growth is dedicated to a lot of different issue areas, including these reciprocation efforts. We're doing something like 45% of gross profit pre-contribution at this point. It wasn't always that way, but we've always had a model like whatever we can give, we will. And and we're starting to see these other ethical business models. I'm so gratified to see this happening, and I really do feel this is the seeds of a ethical psychedelic industry-wide, ethic. And obviously there's examples of the opposite out there, but I think companies that are set up this way and with the consciousness that's inherent with these medicines and experience, that I'm optimistic that they will attract market share and consumer loyalty, that are looking for the right kind of vibration, the right companies that are providing medicine in the right way. So and with reciprocation built in, so I'm optimistic.
I'd love to jump in and echo most of what David just said, but to continue that, this is one reason why I believe that patents can be useful, is because by creating these patents, and by then giving them the power to the indigenous societies, they then are the ones who control this. And then by working with them, it basically means that we can control the bad actors from being able to utilize these things. And so even though there may not be a law which demands reciprocity, essentially, at least for 20 years, a patent gives you the ability to control that. And so it would enable indigenous groups to demand reciprocity because the other actors wouldn't have a choice. And so it basically utilizes the current law system to do that, in my opinion. And that at the same time, I think that it's a myth that you can't make money and help people at the same time. I think the problem is that businesses are dedicated to short-term and investor-motivated profits, and that when you instead build companies and societies for long-term, it is an easy thing to do. And it's just shifting your time frame from 30, 60, 90, or 120 days or a year to 10, 20, 30 years, a century, 2 centuries, 3 centuries from now. And I don't think that Western society is built upon that. And as David mentioned, we just externalize all the costs.
I'd like to jump in also and just, when we think about stakeholder models, I think that, that really is akin to indigenous values, right? Kinship societies in which we come from, really making sure that we're taking care of one another, right? Being good relatives to one another, making sure that everyone in community has what they need. And the stakeholder model was recently backed by the Business Roundtable. So the pendulum is shifting in the space. And I think this is a really exciting time for us. And we see other powerhouse companies like, David Bronner and Dr. Bronner's. We see other powerhouse companies like Airbnb, who created, I believe, a host endowment fund in preparation for their IPO to make sure that their communities of hosts were really aligned, making sure that their stakeholders were a part of their business. I believe OutSchool dedicated 2% of its stocks to funds for educators. There's a lot of businesses doing that, and that's why, when they say stakeholders are this alternative business model, no, let's make it the only business model, right? Let's shift our language and the way we're thinking, and really make sure that we're promoting the businesses that are doing it in this way, that we're spending our personal capital, within these businesses, and that we're investing in these businesses who are choosing to do it in this way. And that's how we can really ensure that there's higher visibility of the folks doing it in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Shifting a little bit, question from Paul Antico. Why hasn't more effort been put into access through full decriminalization, not lowest priority, which then allows access for everyone while stopping monopolization attempts by companies like Compass. And I bring that up right now also because of what many may have been seeing, and David B was a part of recently around Compass's recent, both patent attempts and also some sense that they were trying to block the Oregon psilocybin Psi 2020 initiative.
Yeah, I mean, we're 100% believe that, that the medical pharma route is just one route of integrating the medicine, and that, and really it's a tactic to, in my opinion, or kind of view of the landscape is primarily to enable integration of medicines in a more fundamental way for all adults to access, especially via spiritual circles and churches and groups. And to that end, we're major sponsors of Oregon's 109 psilocybin therapy measure, Oregon 110, which decriminalized all drugs in a treatment versus criminalization effort. We just believe the drug war just needs to end. Generally, addiction is a health issue, not a crime. And what's better for people struggling with substance use disorder than psychedelic therapy? And then I guess to the piece of lowest priority. That's like a technicality. A city at a city level, you can't decriminalize. You can only do that at a state level. But what you can do at a city level is you can basically make enforcement of state law the lowest enforcement priority, so that someone's jaywalking, you got to deal with that before you prosecute. And it effectively decriminalizes at the city level. But at the state, absolutely, we need to be decriminalizing all psychedelics, all plant medicines, and all drugs, period, and moving to legal, regulated safe supply, to stop the horror show of the drug war.
I'd love to speak on this. I was actually hoping, unsure of how to venture into this, but I've been an activist for cannabis and psychedelics for most of my life because they've helped me in innumerable ways. I spoke at the FDA hearing, as you mentioned earlier, on CBD and cannabis to try and attempt the government to make these things, to allow these things. And then I've also spoke with the White House since then. But in terms of psychedelics, I recently submitted an amendment to the Washington State House of Representatives to their bill because the Washington State Supreme Court recently ruled that drug possession was unconstitutional, which was an amazing finding. And so now the state legislature is attempting to recriminalize drugs. This is something that I oppose the need of the law in general, but as they're doing it, they're at least reframing it to be less harmful. And as such, I submitted an amendment which would legalize synthetic and natural psychedelics for medicinal or religious use in the state of Washington, and would simultaneously put any animal, peyote, or endangered species into the framework where they would only be able to be cultivated and used without permission from Indigenous societies.
Thanks, David. A technical question here. Does anyone know if Uljana Goncharova might be another name that Troy might go by? Somebody's wanting to get in for moderation.
I'm really bad at pronunciation.
Well,
Not sure.
Mine.
Yeah.
So.
I'd guess probably. Go ahead.
Probably.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we may have
If it's a Compass
somebody
Zoom
new.
bomb, we'll deal with it.
We may have a new visitor. Let's see. Oh, hopefully. Oh, now maybe he's gone. All right, we'll see. We'll see. In the meantime, oh, here we go. The suspense. Okay, well, while they're coming on, I'll go ahead and ask the next question, which might be appropriate for that as well. Oh, it's not. Hi there. I'm gonna actually, yep, wrong one, but welcome for a moment. All right, we tried. A question from Athena G. Are there any partnerships with U.S. federally recognized Native nations with whom collaborations are in the works? Have any committed to the emerging psychedelic industry development? Thank you.
I can jump in here and just say that we have been in consultation with SIA, the Mother Church, as well as River Styx, and really allowing River Styx to go through their FPIC process to identify any stakeholders who feel comfortable in moving with that process forward with us. But really making sure that we're doing the work on our part before engaging with communities, so that we are seeking not to re-traumatize folks. So that in part has been largely developing that free, prior, and informed consent to make sure it's culturally tailored, and to make sure that we have all the resources ready and to implement when we sit down with those communities. So really a lot of gratitude to both SIA and River Styx for their community partnerships.
And similarly, Fantasy is working with many of the same organizations, and we've reached out to, we're here on the Duwamish land currently, and I am from the Joshua Tree area, where I believe David is as well currently, and I have reached out to both tribes as well, and we're having discussions, and there may be many more who are involved in the future. It's not a closed door, it's wide open, as I said earlier, and we're hoping that it will be expanded to other tribes as well. And so I think that that's just going to continue to expand.
Thank you both.
I would just like to add that I think it's really important that we acknowledge that there are certain protocols for each individual communities when we're considering Indigenous peoples. And jumping in too soon is disrespectful, right? And we need to honor those protocols and make sure that, again, we have the safety nets in place to make sure that we're holding our end of the bargain, right? There's a lot of sacred bargains that have not been honored in this country, and we want to make sure that Journey Collab is honoring them.
Thanks. Next question from, oh, now it moved. From Holly Flammer. Nope, not the one I was looking for. I'm gonna hold out until I find out. From Marcus Mars. The common is kind of going back. The common issue detected throughout all problems discussed is our money-centered global communities' late-stage capitalism. Ethics and capitalism never resonated together. Why are we all clinging to it? I think that touches on, I mean, that's such a question, but I want to add on to that, right? Going to the esoteric, but also to the extent that you can, really help us paint a picture of the ways that each of you are navigating what it means to operate ethically, obviously ways you haven't talked about yet already, as you engage with late stage capitalism.
I guess I'll start with that. My personal views don't align with capitalism. I think it's evident from the way that we're attempting to behave. The United States, however, and our laws and our legal system are unfortunately set up in such a way that the only way you can operate is inside of these rules, because it's like playing a game. You don't get to pick the rules. You're playing a game. And while we're playing this game, this is the rules. And through our advocacy work to change these laws, we want these things to change. We want that to change. And I think there's also people who are afraid of communism and afraid of socialism, because they equate that to failed previous societies. And the problem is that a government state and an economic state are not the same thing. In Europe, for example, you have socialism and democracy. In places like previously in Germany, you had fascism and socialism. In communism in China and Russia is more centered on fascism. We have democracy and some sort of capitalism. However, you could also have a communistic democratic society, which would be, in my opinion, the ideal. So I agree that this is not the best way, but we are playing this game right now. And I would love to change the rules, and I welcome a constitutional convention to do so personally. So that is something I'm trying to work with government constantly to change the rules of the game. So I agree.
I'd like to jump in and say, something that came to me when I heard that was their system, my way, right? And I think that, I'd like to share a story, and, that's what Indigenous peoples do, right? We tell stories. But my grandfather, Chief Oshkosh, right, was able to do something that was incredible, right? He was able to walk in both worlds. He was able to ensure that the Menominee people were able to stay in our ancestral lands where our creation story started, but he was also able to barter with the United States government and cede our land slowly, and today we are still, on our ancestral land. Our powwow grounds are where our ancestors danced, for time immemorial. And so I think that, yeah, it's difficult to operate within these systems, but there's a way in which we can bring our ways of knowing and being into them, right? A stakeholder model, in its essence, is kinship, right? And so how can we just really ensure that these models are not the alternative models, but again, what I said, making them the mainstream models, the natural models in which we are inclined to support. And so I think that I also walk in two worlds, and that is something that is quite difficult for me. I'm on the grassroots end with my nonprofit, the Urban Indigenous Collective, where we're advocating for a culturally tailored healthcare center in New York City, because we don't have one. There's over 100,000 urban natives here in Lenape-Hoking, and we do not have one culturally tailored healthcare center. And so I'm fighting on the ground every day. I have a database for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. We do technical assistance. We're out here trying to increase the visibility. And it's important that companies like Journey Collab, who have access to larger pools of capital, are able to really shift the pendulum with their stance and how they build their business. So we'll weigh in.
Yeah, absolutely. Capitalism, as it's generally practiced, seeks to exploit labor in the environment, at the lowest possible cost to maximize profit. And obviously, this is a recipe for disaster on the planet. But while I'm a big fan of socialized democracies in Scandinavia, I don't believe in socialism all the way. I believe in private ownership, or would say, not maybe private ownership isn't the best path as far as the future, but steward ownership, but not state controlled. Not having like state control of making our shoes and our clothes and our medicine. I believe it, is appropriate to have private ownership, but it should be steward ownership, where we're stewards, and we're acknowledging the workers and the earth from which all profits are being made, and making sure their livelihoods are respected and their labor is respected and not being exploited, and ecosystems are not being damaged in the process. So, I think the question is, a hybrid approach of socialism and capitalism. And I think this is kind of middle path in these social ventures that are being set up that are not about profit maximization, they're about stakeholder maximization. But it's not necessarily, socialism, but it is in the sense of that it's not prioritizing economic return.
Mm-hmm. I can't help but wonder, not to get too much into it, but I have, from those who know way more than I do, heard some musings that a stakeholder model would not. Welcome back, Troy.
Wow.
That is, yeah, we're so glad to have you right in the last couple minutes. I'm going to finish this thought, and then we'll see if we can tap you in to share a bit before we close out. Welcome back. Yeah, that stakeholder model over time might not end up holding up in a court of law and could be overturned, and makes me think of, kind of the forces, right, that were depicted in the story. We will call it Paula, where at a certain point, and I think David H. and Sutton were both speaking with the different models that your companies are taking and how you're trying to make them, for lack of a better phrase, bulletproof, and really having to play the game of chess and lay it out in all these different areas. So I just want to bring that in here as we're talking up stakeholder models, which I'm also a big fan of. So curious if you have any thoughts on that or knowledge. Was that clear, or was that just confusing? Just, yeah, curious about the potential for a stakeholder model to be broken down and not upheld in a court of law, or as exponential growth happens in new. Yeah.
And are you throwing this out generally?
Just generally.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, the Benefit Corp. So there's a new corporate form called Benefit Corporation. And I'm not sure, Sutton and David, if you guys are taking advantage of this. And I mean, if you got the right mission aligned investors, maybe it's not so crucial, but probably still is a good idea. And the idea is that the Benefit Corp allows multi-stakeholder companies to be set up and not be whipsawed by minority investor lawsuits. So a default corporation right now, your one and only purpose is to maximize fiduciary return to shareholders. So even a minor shareholder can sue you if they're saying, okay, like we don't want you giving all your patents away to the Comanche. That you just ruined a whole lot of my wealth return with that move. And if you're set up as a general CRS corp, they can stop you and basically prevent these kind of mission related multi-stakeholder models. But a benefit corp allows you to enshrine social impact or purposes for the benefit of society in general that are prioritized alongside or even superior to fiduciary return to shareholders. So then it kind of protects the company and the mission from these lawsuits and enables these models to thrive and not be sabotaged.
Thanks for taking that on, David, right there, right at the end. There's so much. I feel like we just opened a whole new wormhole to go down, and it's 4:30 and we need to shift to wrap. And I want to thank you all. And I wonder if actually, Troy, you might do us the honors to help close us out in our time today, and so we can feel your voice and energy back here in the room. And before I shift it to you, to just acknowledge and thank everyone who's been here in presence and in writing and bringing in your questions. I know there's more that we didn't get to. I hope during this time, if folks on the Chacruna staff, as well as our wonderful panelists here, can share in the chat for those who want to learn more, how folks can reach out to you and learn more about your initiatives and support. And from here, turning it over to Troy to finish us out for today. Thank you all so much. Troy.
I sure want to thank y'all. This is Wahine. This is the world's first Hawaiian hawk born in captivity. She's very sacred to the Polynesians, and she's here to educate everybody about cultural aspects, conservation, and she's been an amazing advocate for that world. And so I just thought I'd bring her out and share. It's been trying to breed this young lady for about 20 years. And finally, she's about 3 years old. She was on the endangered species list when it started in 1967. And of course, the last administration took them off, not because they weren't endangered, but because they wanted to manipulate the land. So pay attention when people are doing things like that, and put your vote and your care and your love behind these people, because they support the indigenous groups on a much deeper level than us people do. And so just wanted to share it with you and be thankful and appreciative for all y'all do. And it's makes us feel good here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much. We are smack dab in the middle, right in the beginning, at the ending, all time, all the time. We're in it together. Thank you so much.